What's up, guys? CJ here, and welcome back to another all-new episode of the Superfriends podcast, number 109. I'm joined, as always, by Tim.
How's it going, everyone?
And Luke.
Hey, guys, what's happening?
The Wrap had a very, very scathing Justice League, I'll call it an expose. It was probably, an enterprise story, this article about really what happened. Just kind of, taking a step back, analyzing the factors, and just looking at what really led to this film not only being the way it was, but being received the way it was. And I call it an expose because it's pretty damning. It's scathing. This comes to us from Humberto Gonzalez, working in conjunction with one of the other guys at the Wrap. One second, let me double check here. Tim Malloy, wanted to give him credit where credit was due. And it is, when I say scathing, I mean really scathing. They talk about the fact that they allege really, ultimately, that Snyder had too much free reign, that it was really about posturing ahead of a really massive merger, and we'll talk about all of that. And ultimately, it was more of a, it was not meddled enough in, and then too much meddling all at once. And so it was Warner Brothers, ultimately, that's to blame in this article. And let's just dive right in. One of the bold claims throughout this piece is that WB essentially gave Snyder 100% free reign. Now, this might not sound crazy. Of course, Warner Brothers likes to posture themselves, as the filmmaker's studio. But he basically, when you read into the details of this, Snyder reported to Greg Silverman and Greg Silverman only, and that Silverman didn't read any of his reports or notes, and he basically just let Snyder do what he wanted. Apparently, they lay this more at the feet of Silverman, because this is back when he was president. He resigned last December. They lay this at the feet of Silverman and say that he really just didn't do anything. And they kind of stopped just shy of calling it laziness. Is this really a valid concern? And how involved should a studio be? I mean, maybe when things are going, off the rails, should he have stepped in? It's obviously a huge discussion in the film industry right now after what happened first with Ant-Man and Edgar Wright, the Snyder fiasco, kind of on the other side of that, and then, back to the Disney side, it was, Phil Lord and Chris Miller being fired off the Han Solo movie with like 2 weeks left in filming. And of course, as Disney looms closer and closer to acquiring 20th Century Fox, it's something that's going to continue dominating the discussion up to and after that deal is done, if it gets done, I should say. In your guys' mind, like, how involved should a studio be? Is there a line that, is crossed at some point that maybe, okay, then you step in? Like, what is the line? It's kind of a tough question to answer, but do you guys think that a studio should always be hands-off, or, a studio should always be involved in the discussion?
It depends on the type of project it is. Like, if it's the studio commissioning the project and they have a set idea for what they want, then I understand, like, them being more heavily involved in it because they're putting money into it, they want to get what they wanted out of it, even if the director has a different vision for it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that in principle. I think the Han Solo case, a lot of people will just look at that on the face of it and say they fired them because of creative differences, because Disney doesn't want to let, creators be creative. And it's really not that. It's that when you understand what was going on in that movie, Phil Lord and Chris Miller were improvising from day one and went so far off script that the movie was unrecognizable. At least that's what I've heard. And, in that case, you obviously need to step in and say, it's like, okay, this is not what we signed up for. This is not what we hired you to do. We need to take action here. Luke, what do you think? Where do you fall on that? I guess, is it closer to film libertarianism or, film kind of regulation?
I'm not like a guy that's, I guess I should say, I don't know, I think, a huge amount of the film industry. I do think I kind of agree with Tim. I think in the sense there's a fine line, I think, between full creative freedom and then committee-driven stuff, because I think you have to have conversations between them both. Communication, I think, is key in trying to get the best product possible, because I think, contrary to what a lot of people think, sometimes you have to rein in a creative voice to kind of streamline a project a little bit more and try to get the best thing possible. If you let someone do whatever the hell they want, I don't think that there's enough discussion to maybe help them get better and maybe produce a more concise project or vision. Like,
Yeah, because some creators work fine without oversight, but then there's others who need that guiding force in order to create a stronger product. Because when you give them too much control on one side, then no one's saying no to them, then you end up with stuff like the prequel trilogy.
Well, especially that definitely is a good example of somebody that probably needed a little creative oversight. But a big point on this is, I respect Zack Snyder a whole hell of a lot. I enjoyed the Watchmen movie for what it was, especially if you don't look at it as a 100% faithful adaptation.
Yeah.
His 300 is also just really enjoyable. I watch it whenever it's on TV, and Man of Steel has grown on me every time I've watched it. I have a lot of respect for the guy. That being said, with a project like this, I think there needs to be a level of communication with the studio, at least with somebody like, someone like a Jeff Johns, who, from what I understand, did not play a major role when this film was originally filming. And, there's a lot of clapping back on Jeff after the fact with this movie. And it's like, especially with the changes that were made, I just don't get it. I mean, it's I think that's the line between, it's like, okay, are you a DC Comics fan or are you a fan of Zack Snyder and like his vision of the universe? Yeah. Because you need that conversation, at least, to make sure that what you're doing squares, and is a faithful adaptation. And that, I think, is the big thing that is going to continue to divide fans as this movie keeps going.
And I mean,
just make sure that you're talking with the studio when you're being a director. Make sure you're talking with the studio going in, making sure you know what they want out of it, and let them know what you're bringing to it, so you can see if it meshes what you want.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, you want to have like your imprint on something, but I think at the end of the day, we have to remember there's a fine line between like art and a product. Like a movie is like right in between those two things. It doesn't matter like how really well shot it is or like how many innovative things are in it. What you're making is a product, and you have to talk to the people who are going to make that product marketable and sell it to a bunch of people, or try to strengthen it to be as streamlined as whatever.
Yeah,
like
I agree with that.
I don't think it's a problem to maybe get some outside help from like the studio to make something like a little bit more widespread. I don't think there's anything wrong with sacrificing a little bit of what your ideas, just in case some people are like, I don't really like this. There's nothing wrong with being told no, I think.
No, I agree with that completely. But really, that wasn't the galling part of this story to me, because I think we all knew that Snyder really had free reign initially. It's just the way WB did things. They gave Nolan free reign. Of course, Nolan backed that up. But the really galling thing to me, the claim that this article makes, was that basically a lot of these decisions made about the story, about keeping Snyder on, Justice League despite Batman v Superman's mixed response, despite apparently some people in WB really wanting him removed and claiming that he was not the right choice and thinking that he needed to be removed, they kept him on, and it was mostly posturing. And specifically, it was posturing, presenting an air of strength and a unified front in advance of the AT&T Time Warner merger. They claimed that a lot of these things, delaying the film would have been seen as weakness, firing Snyder would have been seen as weakness, and it might have affected their bottom line with this merger that they so desperately want to go through.
AT&T did not care about the Flash's production, though.
Probably not. But how much do you guys think that really factored in?
A lot.
It makes a lot of sense for why they didn't push Justice League back despite the guard change. It makes sense for them wanting to move forward with Zack Snyder even after the critical backlash to BVS.
Yeah.
Because they could have replaced him before they started Justice League, but they kept going forward with it, and it makes sense that they were doing it just to show commitment towards doing this, to give a stronger front toward AT&T for the merger.
Yeah, I don't know if it ties in or anything, but I keep remembering that whole little battle for the date that they kept having with the Captain America movie a few years ago.
Oh yeah, that was really like Batman v Superman, where they were like, okay, this is our date, and Disney was like, not anymore. And Justice League was,
I don't know.
or not Justice League, Batman v Superman's like, fuck.
Yeah,
I love that with Disney with their products now. They just go to a date, no matter what's there, just go slam their dick on the ground and stand there and see if anyone walks away.
I think, at the very least, I can say this makes a lot of sense that Warner Brothers does not want to seem weak to the masses. It wants to portray strength and vigor.
Well, they specifically kind of divided this into two parts where they said, Warner Brothers maybe cares too much about projecting strength in any case. And ultimately it was the decision of the highest levels of Time Warner, like Kevin Sugihara levels, not to move, not to fire Snyder. All of that was just decided at the highest levels of the company. But, they kind of then say it's like delaying the film was really because this merger is, incipient. And, it's been, of course, the federal government's gotten involved now. But, that definitely seems to make a lot of sense. It seems to be, an answer that I don't think anyone would have expected, but that definitely seems legitimate. I don't know how much it really factored in, 100%, but, I think it was a factor. I'm not ready to say it was the biggest factor, but it certainly was a factor.
It could have been prevented.
They also claimed that the higher-ups wanted their bonuses before the deal.
Bring that up
But I don't know. I've heard from other people that that's not how, WB works, that, and they said it in the story, too. It's like that's, they're usually rewarded for good decisions, not necessarily delaying the film wouldn't have necessarily constituted a bad decision, but they did say, they said you could get, rewarded for that if it turns out to be a good decision, but they did clarify that, since it was kind of on a running clock with this merger looming, I guess they were thinking that, hey, if we delay it, we might not get bonuses until after the merger or something like that, and they might be affected by the merger. I don't know. That's something that I ultimately don't think was a big factor, but I don't know. Let's move on to the final, basically the ultimate conclusion that the article comes to. And they stated in the beginning, but it seems like the ultimate conclusion to me is that sticking with a November 2017 release date was ultimately what hurt this movie. It's ultimately what killed this movie. And I guess just agree or disagree. I mean, knowing what we know about it, I highly recommend you guys read this article if you're listening, because it really does go in depth on the internal politics that basically really ground this movie to a halt. But ultimately, it seems like the big thing is that not moving this movie was what did it in.
Yeah, I could agree with that.
Yeah, it definitely, like I said with the guard change, it needed more time to flesh out what it was going to become,
especially with the amount of reshoots apparently, because basically had to redo a bunch of the movie. Just seems like I don't know. Just seems like they trapped themselves pretty bad with this when they didn't have to.
No, I agree. It's one of those things where you don't know where they would have moved it to. I mean, would they have delayed it a full year, given the fact that Disney is really front-loaded in 2018? They basically would have any date after July that they wanted. But I don't know. It's one of those things where what we got was such a hodgepodge. Basically a mashup of, and they claim in the article, it's basically just the parts of the movies that different executives and directors liked, that it eventually got, it's very similar to what happened to Suicide Squad, although I think this movie is a little more enjoyable. I don't know, man.
To a lesser extent of Batman v Superman as well. They,
a little bit.
So that was cut.
But I think just more the fact that it was assembled, from multiple pieces. I think it worked. It worked better in the end than Suicide Squad did, but the process sounds remarkably similar to that film. Oh well, I think we're all in agreement then that not moving it was probably what ultimately could have saved this movie. They could have, if they moved it, it might have been saved, but they chose not to do that, and that's what did it in.